I'm Mr. Clinton, and I teach orchestra. Starting in 5th grade, you have the privilege and opportunity to learn how to play a musical instrument. And we have two different classes of instruments. We have the band instruments that Mr. Carr teaches, and we have the orchestra instruments that I teach. This video is to help you understand what the orchestra instruments are and introduce you to them. Different instruments have different timbres or tone colors like you learned in music class, which means they sound different, or they have different pitch ranges. Some play high, some play low, some have a gravelly tone, some have a brighter tone. But choosing an instrument, think about the things that you like, and that will help you choose an instrument better. The instruments that we teach in orchestra are the violin, the viola, and the cello. There is another string instrument in orchestra that is 6 feet tall called the double bass. We do not start in elementary school on the double bass because it's too big. We do have high school people that transfer and change instruments and play the double bass, but that's after you grow a little bit. So, without further ado, the violin. It is the smallest of the orchestral string family, and as you know from music class, the smaller an instrument is, the higher it plays, the higher the notes are, and the bigger an instrument is, the lower it plays. So the violin is the highest instrument in the string family. So the lowest you can play on a violin, it's a little out of tune, and the highest you can play, the highest string, is there, but you can get pretty high on a violin. So violin sounds like this. Ooh, in tune, Clinton. That's the violin, and they're different, depending on what you're playing, you can play all sorts of songs with it. So depending how you play it can change the sound of it. So that time I played it, it was relatively smooth. This time I can play it. I can play it separate and change the way that it sounds. There's tons of other things you can play. So violin isn't the lowest sounding instrument, but you can play pretty low notes. So that's the violin, the highest sounding of the instruments. The next instrument we have is called the viola. The viola, as you can probably see, is a little bit bigger. And that means it's going to have a deeper, richer sound than the violin. Not as bright. So the lowest sound, the lowest string you can play on the viola is there. The highest string is, and you can also get high on the viola, but it is not as high as the violin. So this is what a viola sounds like. Okay, I'm a little scratchy. This isn't my own instrument, so it feels a little weird to me. You can play the same songs on a viola. So or even okay, so the viola, a lower instrument still played on the shoulder, but it's a middle instrument. The lowest instrument we have is the cello. The cello is considerably larger, and we sit on, or it sits on the floor, and we hold it upright this direction instead of the other way. And it obviously is the lowest instrument out of these three. Okay, that's the lowest string. That's the highest string without putting fingers on it, and then same thing as the violin and viola. You can play higher notes on the cello, but obviously not as high as the violin and the viola. So cello sounds like this. That's the cello, and same thing, you can play all sorts of different songs with it. Or especially that is the cello, the lower of the stringed instruments. So before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit about how to get an instrument. Oh, I forgot one thing. These instruments, when you play them by themselves, you can play all the same songs. They just sound different. They have a different tone color, or they have a different range of high and low pitches. But you can still play melodies, the same melodies on violin, viola, and cello. In a group, they tend to have their own musical jobs. The cello, being the lowest, tends to play the bass line more, which is the lowest notes that hold the group together. The violin tends to play the melody, the actual tune that you would hum or whistle or sing. And the viola tends to play harmony parts, matching notes with the melody and the bass line that fill in the sound. Sometimes the viola will play the melody and the violin will play the harmony. In fact, in a group, there's usually a high violin section and a low violin section written into the music. The high violins play the melody and the low violins play a harmony part, just like the violas do. So the violas sometimes will play the melody, the violins often play the melody, the cellos sometimes will play the melody, but they also have their particular jobs. The last thing is how to get an instrument, and I want to touch on this because with online shopping and with manufacturing becoming so cheap, there are a lot of really poor quality, they call them instruments, but really in the business they call them VSOs, violin-shaped objects. And the thing about wooden instruments is if you don't use good quality wood, it doesn't sound very good. Think of balsa wood versus oak. If you knock on a door that's a pocket door or that's a hollow door, it has this dull, thuddy, terrible sound. And if you knock on a hardwood door, it has this nice resonance to it. And if you use cheap wood, your instrument, no matter how good you get, will sound dull and cheap. These instruments also are poorly crafted. The pegs often are not made out of the densest wood you can possibly get, which is ebony. And when you turn them, they'll swell and contract, and they'll wedge themselves into the holes, and you won't be able to use them, or they'll constantly let loose, and the strings will always fall loose. And when you first start, you don't even know how to fix that. So that's really, really annoying. The bridges are poor quality wood. It should be hard old maple. And if it's poor quality wood, it tends to warp and get wrecked, and then you have to pay money to replace it. The seams tend to come loose. They don't dry the wood right, and it'll crack. So you'll get cracks in your instrument. And they're just generally not good instruments to buy. Unfortunately, you look at them and they say, teacher approved, and it's only $150 with 2 bows and a case. And they do all this marketing thing to try to rope you in, but I promise you they're not the best option. The best option is going through a company that's designed for students that does a rent-to-own or kind of like a lease program where you pay a little bit every month, and then once you've paid off that instrument, they send you a letter saying, stop paying us, it's yours, blah, blah, blah. There are different companies, and if you go to wyamusic.com, I have the companies that often rent to our students there, and you can look at their websites. But there are other companies available. I'm not going to say you have to do those. But one of the bonuses of those companies is that violins, violas, and cellos come in different sizes. If you are in 5th grade, you still have some growing to do. And a cello or a viola especially, but even violins, if it's too big, your fingers have to stretch really far, and it's hard to reach the notes, and it's really not a good way to learn to play. It's actually harmful to your technique and makes it harder to learn. So they come in a smaller size. So the rental programs will send you whatever size fits you, and I have information on my website about how to measure and see what size you should order. But once you grow, as you're playing, I may check and I may measure you along the way and say, hey, contact the company, you're ready for an upsize. And the way these rentals work is you call them up and they say, oh, okay, and they either send you the bigger instrument and then you put the smaller instrument in the box and send it back to them, or one of the companies actually comes to school, you could drop it off at school and get it traded in. But they will upsize for you until you get to your full-size instrument, and the full-size instrument is what you actually will end up owning, but you'll get a couple smaller ones along the way. So I think that's really important for cost effectiveness. If you buy an instrument that's the right size, a year or two later you may have to buy another instrument that's bigger and then buy another instrument. So at that point you've bought cheaper instruments maybe in order to not waste your money, and you've ended up spending as much as you would on a full-size instrument in a rental program and gotten a cheaper, yuckier sounding instrument that's never going to work as well all along the way. Another really good bonus of the rental programs is they have insurance built in, where if something breaks on your instrument, as long as you didn't break it intentionally, they will fix it for you. And the one thing they don't fix is strings. If you break a string, you will have to buy another string. But you know, if the bridge breaks or there becomes a crack in one of the seams, which can happen sometimes in even good instruments, that they can glue it back down again, they can fix any peg problems. But that is one of the bonuses of having a rental instrument like that. So we encourage you to try that. Another bonus is if you play and then you decide you don't like playing and you don't want to play anymore, if you return the instrument, you don't have to pay any more. Whenever you return the instrument, your rental is done and you've only paid what you've put into it. So if you're on the fence and you're not sure if you're going to keep playing for the next 7 years, that's okay. If you try it out, you'll pay a little bit for the privilege to try it, but then if you turn it back in, you're not on the hook for all of that information. So the last thing, nope, that's not the last thing. The other way you can get an instrument is if somebody has one. If mom played the viola and has a viola at home, if dad played the cello, if Aunt Marge has a violin she'll let you use, you can play that instrument, but then you may run into sizing issues where it's the wrong size for you. So that is definitely an option though. If you do that, bring it in so I can check it out. The last option, if you are in a financial difficulty and you're on free and reduced lunch and you really want to play, but it's just paying that little bit a month is just not possible for you, the school does own some instruments that we can let students borrow while they are enrolled in their courses in order to practice and play their instruments. And we can do that for you. I ask that your parents directly contact me and we work that out. If that's the case, please don't do this just saying, well, I'm not sure if I want to do it, so I want to borrow from the school. We keep these so that everyone gets free access to a full education, and people that are in financial difficulty have that ability to get an instrument. We don't want to use those instruments for people that can actually try it out on a rental program. But you can borrow from the school. The thing about borrowing from the school is once you are no longer enrolled in the class, if you decide not to play anymore, or if you graduate high school and you go on to college, you have to return those instruments back to school. They are not yours to keep. Whereas a rental program, you actually have that instrument to keep. So I'm really excited. It seems like there are a lot of people excited to play orchestra instruments this year, and I'm really excited to get you started. Check my website, and I'm sending a paper home that'll give you tons more information and give you my contact information so that you can ask me any questions you need. But let's make some awesome music this year and join Orchestra. I'd love to see you there.